Imagine it is midnight on September 20th, 1777. You are an American soldier in George Washington's army, camped in a clearing in the deep woods of Pennsylvania. It is cold. A freezing rain is falling. You and 1,500 other exhausted men are fast asleep, huddled tightly around blazing campfires to stay warm. You think you are safe. You think you are hidden. But just 2 miles away, hidden in the pitch-black forest, a British general named Charles Grey is giving his troops one of the most chilling orders in the history of warfare. He orders his men to stop. He orders them to reach into their muskets. And he orders them to remove their flints. For an 18th century soldier, taking the flint out of your musket means your gun cannot fire. It is completely useless for shooting. But Grey does not want his men to shoot. A single gunshot would ruin the surprise. Instead, he orders his men to fix their bayonets and draw their swords. They are going to march into the American camp in dead silence. They are not going to take prisoners. They are going to stab, slash, and slaughter every American they find while they are still in their blankets. Within the hour, the American camp will be completely destroyed. It will become known as the Paoli Massacre, a night of terror so brutal that it sent shockwaves of panic through the entire Continental Army. But how did a force of battle-hardened Americans get caught entirely by surprise? And why did this horrifying night completely change the way the American military fought for the rest of the war? To understand how this midnight nightmare happened, you have to look at the massive game of chess being played in the fall of 1777. The British Army, led by General William Howe, had one major goal: capture Philadelphia. At the time, Philadelphia was the capital of the United States. It was where the Continental Congress sat. It was the beating heart of the American Rebellion. The British believed that if they took the city, they would break the spirit of the Revolution and end the war right then and there. George Washington knew this. He had positioned his entire Continental Army between the British and Philadelphia to stop them. But things were not going well. Just 9 days earlier, on September 11th, the British had badly beaten Washington at the Battle of Brandywine. Washington's army was bruised, bleeding, and exhausted, but they were not entirely broken. They retreated, trying to lick their wounds and figure out a way to strike back. Washington needed to slow the British down. He needed a distraction. So, he made a decision. He took a detachment of 1,500 highly capable American soldiers and put them under the command of Brigadier General Anthony Wayne. Wayne was 32 years old, aggressive, fearless, and deeply familiar with this part of Pennsylvania because he had actually grown up just a few miles away. Washington gave Wayne a very specific, highly dangerous mission. Wayne was supposed to take his men, sneak into the dense woods behind the British Army, and hide. He was ordered to wait in the shadows until the main British Army packed up their camps and started marching toward Philadelphia. Once they were on the move, Wayne was supposed to burst out of the woods and attack the British baggage trains from behind. It was a classic ambush. Hit their supplies, cause massive chaos, and slow their march to the capital. It was a brilliant plan on paper, but in war, even the best plans can turn into a death trap. General Anthony Wayne did exactly what George Washington ordered. He marched his 1,500 men into the deep, dark woods near the Paoli Tavern, just 2 miles away from the main British encampment. He positioned his troops in a secluded clearing, completely surrounded by a thick wall of trees. It looked like the perfect hiding spot. Wayne was incredibly confident. He even wrote a letter to Washington, assuring the commander-in-chief that the British had absolutely no idea he was sitting right behind them in the dark. He firmly believed he was the hunter, quietly waiting for the perfect moment to strike the British supply wagons. But Wayne made one fatal miscalculation. He forgot about the locals. This specific area of Pennsylvania was heavily populated by loyalists, American colonists who still fiercely supported the British king. To them, Wayne and his men were not patriots. They were armed, dangerous rebels trespassing on their land, As Wayne's men set up their camp and lit their roaring fires to fight off the freezing rain, local Tory spies were already slipping quietly through the forest. They walked right into the British camp and asked to speak to the commanders. They handed the British an absolute gift: the exact location, the exact size, and the exact layout of General Anthony Wayne's hidden camp. Wayne thought he was completely invisible. In reality, the British were staring right at his front door. When this intelligence reached the British High Command, it landed on the desk of Major General Charles Grey. Grey was a cold, calculating, and ruthlessly efficient professional soldier. He did not just want to defend against Wayne's potential ambush. He saw a rare, golden opportunity. Grey realized that Wayne's men were trapped in a small clearing, completely isolated from Washington's main army, and entirely unaware that their secret was out. Grey did not want to fight a normal battle. He wanted to wipe Wayne's force off the map entirely. And he knew exactly how to do it. General Charles Grey gathered 1,200 of his best troops. The weather was absolutely miserable. It was pitch black, with cold, driving rain and thick fog rolling through the trees. Most military commanders would wait out the storm until morning. But Grey used the terrible weather as a weapon. Before they marched, he issued the specific order that earned him a terrifying nickname for the rest of history: No Flint Grey. In 1777, soldiers used flintlock muskets. A piece of flint strikes steel, creates a spark, ignites the gunpowder, and fires the lead bullet. If you remove the flint, the gun becomes completely useless. You cannot shoot it even if you try. So, why would a general intentionally disarm his own men? Because in a night attack, surprise is your only advantage. If one nervous British soldier trips in the dark and accidentally pulls the trigger, a loud bang will echo through the woods. The Americans will wake up, grab their weapons, and the deadly trap is ruined. Grey refused to take that risk. Plus, it was pouring rain. Wet gunpowder rarely fires anyway. But a 16-inch steel bayonet? A bayonet never misfires. A bayonet does not care if it is raining. 1,200 British soldiers removed the flints from their guns. They locked their bayonets onto the barrels. They drew their heavy swords. To make sure they did not get lost in the dark woods, Grey's men dragged a local blacksmith out of his bed. They forced him at sword point to guide them through the twisting, muddy forest trails straight toward the American camp. As they crept closer, they ran into the outer ring of American guards. The American guards heard footsteps. They challenged the shadows in the dark. But the British did not shoot back. They rushed forward and silenced the American guards with cold steel before a single warning shot could be fired. The path to Anthony Wayne's sleeping army was now completely wide open. It is almost 1:00 a.m. The American camp is dead quiet, except for the sound of freezing rain hitting the leaves. General Anthony Wayne's men are exhausted. They are sleeping deeply, huddled as close as possible to their roaring campfires to fight off the biting cold. But those comforting campfires are about to become a fatal trap. Suddenly, a terrifying war cry shatters the silence of the night. 1,200 British soldiers burst from the black tree line like ghosts. They do not fire a single shot. They charge straight into the sleeping camp with their bayonets lowered and their heavy swords drawn. For the Americans, the confusion is absolute. They wake up to the horrifying sounds of screaming and tearing canvas. Men scramble in the slippery mud, desperately trying to find their muskets. But they are completely blind in the dark forest. The British, on the other hand, can see perfectly. The roaring American campfires act like massive spotlights. The bright flames perfectly illuminate the panicked American soldiers against the pitch-black backdrop of the night. The British simply use the firelight to hunt them down one by one. It is an absolute slaughter. The Americans try to shoot back, but the heavy rain has completely soaked their gunpowder. Their muskets only produce a useless, empty click. When they frantically try to reload in the dark, the British are already on top of them. The sheer psychological terror of fighting an enemy that does not shoot, an enemy that only stabs and slashes in the dark, causes instant, widespread panic. American soldiers run blindly into the surrounding woods, only to be chased down by British horsemen swinging heavy cavalry swords. There is no military formation. There is no organized defense. It is just desperate, bloody survival. Within minutes, Wayne's secret camp is completely shattered. When the sun finally rises over the Paoli clearing the next morning, the scene is an absolute nightmare. The freezing rain washes over mutilated bodies, slashed tents, and burning supply wagons. The British had completely destroyed the camp. They killed at least 53 Americans, wounded over 100 more, and took dozens of prisoners. They also stole vital supplies, weapons, and horses. But the physical damage is nothing compared to the psychological blow. General Charles Gray's brutal no-flint attack sends a massive wave of terror through George Washington's entire army. The Americans realize the British are not just fighting to win, they are fighting to completely exterminate them. And the strategic disaster is even worse. George Washington had sent Anthony Wayne to distract the British. But with Wayne's force shattered, the road to the capital is completely wide open. Just a few days after the massacre, the British Army marches into Philadelphia and captures the city without firing a single shot. The American capital has fallen. For General Anthony Wayne, the nightmare is just beginning. When he regroups with the main army, his own officers turn against him. Rumors spread like wildfire. People whisper that Wayne was sleeping on duty, that he was reckless, and that he let his men get slaughtered. The whispers turn into formal charges. Wayne faces a military court-martial for sheer negligence. But Anthony Wayne is not the kind of man who backs down from a fight. Instead of hiding, he demands a full public inquiry. He fiercely defends himself in court, proving that he had set up proper guards and that the British just outplayed him with local spies. The military court eventually clears his name with honor. But Wayne does not forget. He takes the humiliation and the sheer horror of that bloody night, and he turns it into pure, burning revenge. The British general, Charles Gray, thought the Paoli Massacre would completely break the spirit of the American rebellion. He firmly believed that the sheer terror of a midnight bayonet attack would make George Washington's soldiers drop their weapons, run away, and hide forever. But he was dead wrong. Instead of breaking the Americans, the brutal slaughter at Paoli just made them incredibly angry. It united them. As horrifying stories of the massacre spread through the colonies, American soldiers began to whisper a brand new battle cry. Remember Paoli. It was no longer just a memory of defeat. It became a blood promise of payback. And no one wanted payback more than General Anthony Wayne. The massacre fundamentally changed him. He realized exactly why the British had won that night. The British were absolute masters of the bayonet, and the Americans were terrified of it. In fact, most American soldiers in 1777 just used their bayonets as tools to cook meat over their campfires. They had no idea how to actually fight with them. Wayne decided right then and there that he was going to beat the British at their own terrifying game. He became completely obsessed with hand-to-hand combat. He pushed his men through grueling, relentless training. He made sure every single soldier in his command knew how to fix a bayonet, hold a tight line, and fight viciously in the dark. His intense, almost crazy obsession with strict military discipline and revenge earned him a legendary nickname that is still famous in American history today: Mad Anthony Wayne. He was just waiting for the perfect moment to unleash his highly trained soldiers. And 2 years later, in the summer of 1779, George Washington handed him the ultimate opportunity for revenge. In July 1779, George Washington called Mad Anthony Wayne into his headquarters. He pointed to a map on the table and gave Wayne a mission that looked absolutely impossible. The target was a powerful British fortress called Stony Point. Stony Point was not just a normal fort. It was a massive, jagged rocky peninsula sticking straight out into the deep waters of the Hudson River in New York. It was surrounded by water on 3 sides. The only way to attack it from the land was by crossing a deadly, waist-deep swamp. The British had heavily fortified the top of the cliffs with massive cannons, thick wooden spikes, and hundreds of elite, battle-hardened soldiers. They loudly bragged that the fortress was completely unsinkable. They even called it their Little Gibraltar. Taking this fortress by direct force was considered a total suicide mission. But Wayne just looked at the map, smiled, and reportedly told Washington that he would gladly storm hell itself if Washington gave the order. Wayne knew that a normal, daytime attack would fail instantly. The heavy British cannons would blast his men to pieces before they even crossed the swamp. To win, Wayne had to do something completely crazy. He had to use the exact same terrifying tactic that British General Charles Grey had used to massacre his own men 2 years earlier at Paoli. They were going to attack in the dead of night. And just like the British did at Paoli, Wayne ordered his American soldiers to reach into their muskets and completely remove their flints. There would be no shooting. There would be no accidental noises. Every single American soldier was going to rely entirely on cold, sharp steel. The ghosts of Paoli were finally coming back for revenge. It is midnight on July 15, 1779. They are just a few miles from the massive British fortress at Stony Point. Every single flint is removed from every single musket. He looks at his men and tells them something chilling. He says that if anyone disobeys, if anyone makes a sound, or if anyone tries to load a weapon, they will be immediately put to death by the officer standing right next to them. Absolute silence is the only way they survive this night. To make sure they can quickly recognize each other in the dark chaos of hand-to-hand combat, Wayne orders his men to pin pieces of white paper to their hats. Then, the march begins. They move like ghosts through the dense, black woods. To make sure no barking dogs give away their position, Wayne's men quietly capture or kill every single farm dog along the route. The silence is absolute. It is terrifying. When they reach the very edge of the fortress, they hit their first massive obstacle. The tide from the Hudson River has come in, and the swamp surrounding the fort is filled with freezing, waist-deep water. Wayne does not hesitate for a single second. He steps right into the dark water, leading his men directly from the front. His soldiers follow him in complete silence. They hold their heavy muskets high above their heads to keep them out of the mud. They wade through the thick swamp, step by step, inching closer and closer to the towering cliffs of Stony Point. Up above them, British guards are walking along the walls, completely unaware that a silent army of furious Americans is creeping right beneath their feet. The trap is perfectly set. The bayonets are locked in place. It happens in an instant. A British guard looks down from the high cliffs. He sees a ripple in the dark water. He spots the white pieces of paper pinned to the hats of the American soldiers. He screams a frantic alarm. A single musket shot rings out, breaking the dead silence of the night. Suddenly, the entire British fortress erupts. The British light up the night sky. Massive cannons roar, blasting heavy, flesh-tearing grape shot down into the muddy swamp. Hundreds of British soldiers rush to the stone walls and pour a deadly hail of lead down onto the Americans. Normally, this is the exact moment an attacking army stops, panics, and tries to shoot back. But remember, Anthony Wayne's men do not have flints. They cannot shoot back, even if they want to. Their only option is to run straight into the enemy fire. And that is exactly what they do. The Americans let out a deafening roar. Over the explosive, booming sound of the British cannons, a massive, terrifying battle cry echoes through the New York night. Remember Paoli. Remember Paoli. They charge straight up the steep, jagged cliffs. They use heavy axes to ruthlessly chop through the thick wooden spikes the British set up as a trap. They do not stop for a single second. Right in the middle of the chaotic charge, a British musket ball slams straight into General Anthony Wayne's head. He drops to the dirt, bleeding heavily. For a second, it looks like the leader of the American force is dead. But Wayne is not finished. He looks up at his men, blood pouring down his face, and orders them to carry him into the fort so he can die at the head of his column. Seeing their general bleeding but refusing to quit, the American soldiers go completely berserk. They swarm over the massive stone walls like a tidal wave of pure, unstoppable rage. The American soldiers pour over the massive stone walls. The hand-to-hand combat is absolutely brutal. But within just 30 minutes, the impossible happens. The unsinkable British fortress completely falls. The British formally surrender. But here is the most incredible part. After all the horror of the Paoli Massacre 2 years earlier, the Americans do not take bloody revenge. When the British surrender, the Americans stop fighting. They take prisoners. They show absolute mercy. By sparing the British, Anthony Wayne's men prove to the world that they are a highly disciplined, professional military force. General Wayne survives his head wound and becomes an absolute national hero. He beat the British at their own deadly game, and the terrifying ghost of Paoli is finally dead. If this untold story of military history kept you hooked, hit that subscribe button right now. We break down the craziest tactical genius every single week, and you do not want to miss the next one.